Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a deep plunge into a really fascinating and, yeah, definitely challenging text from 1934, Viktor Schauberger's Our Senseless Toil.
It really is. It's a deeply critical piece, isn't it? Schauberger wasn't, just offering suggestions. He was fundamentally questioning, well, everything, the whole direction of modern technology, science, society, all through his very unique lens of natural law.
Absolutely. And our mission here is to really unpack this radical critique.
Hmm?
Schauberger's core argument, you see it right from the start, is that humanity's path,
Yeah.
driven by this profound disconnect from nature's principles, well, he thought it wasn't progress at all.
No, quite the opposite. He saw it leading to widespread crisis, even self-destruction.
And the thread running through absolutely everything he talks about in this text is water.
For him, water wasn't just HO, not just a chemical compound.
Right.
He saw it as alive, an energetic entity, the blood of the earth, he called it. And understanding its true nature, its subtle nature, he believed that was the absolute key, the key to solving our problems.
So we're going to explore his really powerful criticisms of practices back then, things like river management, forestry, water supply, even pipelines, surprisingly.
Yeah, things you might not immediately connect.
And then we'll look at his alternative vision, one based on what he saw as nature's own principles, elegant, powerful, often kind of counterintuitive.
It's a journey, all right, into a way of thinking that feels both really old and perhaps surprisingly relevant today.
Okay, let's jump right in. His central diagnosis, this idea that human work, powered by what he calls quite dismissively soulless technology,
Yeah, soul.
is actively working against nature's laws. And in his view, steering us towards disaster, not progress.
He paints a really stark picture, doesn't he, of the world in the 1930s. He sees the symptoms of this fundamental mistake everywhere.
Like what specifically?
Economic collapse, for one. A decline in physical health, moral health, increasing sickness. He specifically calls out cancer quite a bit.
Right.
Environmental damage, obviously. Social breakdown, a general feeling of fear pervading everything.
And he doesn't pull any punches about the cause. For him, it wasn't just incompetence, it was deeper.
Exactly. It was, as he puts it, our ignorance of and interference with nature's fundamental omnipotent laws, driven, he says flat out, by mindless greed.
This interference, he argues, it messes up the deep cycles governing everything.
He brings in this concept, the law of ceaseless cycles. His point is, our modern ways just threw this essential balance completely out of whack.
So it's not just how we build things, but the very foundation of our approach violates the planet's operating system.
That's it, precisely. He sees our tech, our culture, as lawless and mind-destroying because they just don't respect these natural cycles.
He uses some very concrete examples from his time to show how this plays out. His critique of river regulation is a great place to start.
Yeah.
He basically says trying to force rivers into straight lines, reinforcing the banks mechanically.
Yeah.
It's just fundamentally wrong.
His whole point is that the watercourse itself should shape the bank naturally over time, not the other way around.
Right.
By trying to impose our will on the banks, we're completely missing the water's own dynamics, what the water wants to do.
He has this incredible analogy. He says reinforcing banks is like a doctor trying to patch up ruptured capillaries with like a needle and thread.
Wow, yeah. Treating a symptom while wrecking the underlying system.
Exactly. And he points to big rivers, doesn't he? The Danube, the Rhine.
Tagliamento, Etch, Garonne, even the Mississippi. He claims that all this mechanical regulation, it just hadn't worked as intended, often made things worse downstream.
He describes these rivers becoming, what was it, a dirty, gray, muddy brew.
Yeah, losing their essential physical qualities. He contrasts that with a time when you could see river gold gleaming on the bottom.
River gold, what's that about?
It's fascinating. He's talking about this golden light, sometimes seen from pebbles rolling on the riverbed, especially at night in really cold water. His explanation is that as water cools towards that special +4 degrees C point, its density increases, but also its tractive force, its ability to move things. It increases dramatically. So stones get rolled around, rubbed together, create this light.
So his point is that engineered dead water has lost that energy.
Exactly. Lost the energy and the specific conditions that allow for this natural phenomenon. It's a sign the water's health is gone.
And he says even clear mountain streams, if you interfere with them, they become destructive.
Yes, paradoxically.
Mm-hmm.
Streams full of natural energy, when we try to channel them, straighten them out, they become these wild torrents that concrete walls can't even hold back because, he says, we've robbed the water of its soul, its inner structure and vitality.
So the more we force it straight and fast on the outside.
The more chaotic and damaging its external behavior becomes, and the worse its internal quality gets. It's a feedback loop.
He even questions basic physics, like friction in water.
He does. He points out, look, friction usually generates heat, right? But fast-flowing natural water often cools down. And this cooling, he says, increases its power, its attractive force, and its internal friction. He argues this completely upends conventional theories.
Because it suggests some kind of internal energy circulation.
Precisely. Something that gives water its character, its quality. Disrupt that, he says, and the water becomes soulless, without character, and therefore aggressive.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about flow rate, it's about the water's internal energy state. So if that's his view on rivers, what about forestry? Does he apply similar thinking there?
He absolutely does. He sees modern forestry, well, the forestry of his time anyway, as another example of treating nature like a machine, a timber factory, not a living system.
What kind of practices did he criticize?
Things aimed at getting maximum timber yield fast, like planting trees in neat rows, messing with natural regeneration processes, planting species like spruce out in the full sun when they naturally prefer shade, and of course, large-scale clear felling.
And the consequences, in his view.
Well, he argued trees might grow faster initially, sure, but their wood structure ends up looser, weaker, more prone to decay.
He saw a parallel with the rivers then.
Exactly, a kind of mirroring of decay in polluted, mismanaged rivers. And these sick, weakened trees, they become easy targets for pests, for parasites. But he saw the parasites not as the root cause, but as a symptom.
A symptom of the unhealthy conditions we created.
Right, the unnatural practices open the door.
Taking this idea of mishandling natural cycles, how does he view something as basic as our drinking water supply? This feels like a particularly alarming part of the text.
It is. It really is. He fundamentally rejects the approach of just treating water as a chemical compound, H0, that just needs, cleaning up.
So what was he seeing, the standard practices?
Yeah, taking surface water, or what he called juvenile groundwater, water that hasn't matured naturally, filtering it mechanically, and then hitting it with chemicals for sterilization. Chlorine, silver compounds, sometimes irradiation, even back then.
And his description of this treated water is, well, it's pretty scathing.
Oh, completely. He calls this filtered water bad taste, says it's still contaminated by microorganic matter even after filtering, then artificially polluted by chlorine or disinfected by chemical compounds.
He saw the sterilization itself as harmful.
Profoundly so. That process produces highly reactive oxygen in statu nascendi, nascent oxygen or allotropic oxygen specifically to kill organisms. He saw this as damaging the water's essential life force, its structure.
And the consequences he claimed for people drinking this, they sound incredibly severe.
They are. Schauberger argues pretty directly that constantly drinking this kind of sterilized, denatured water leads to the systematic degeneration of humanity and other life forms, too.
Degeneration how?
He talks about physical decay, mental deterioration, decreased potency, mentally, physically, sexually, really fundamental impacts.
And this is where he makes that direct and, frankly, disturbing link to disease, specifically cancer.
Yes. He claims that continuously drinking sterilized water systematically destroys the blood, weakens the body's natural defenses, and, in his view, is a primary contributing factor to cancer.
He even cited statistics from Vienna.
He did, showing cancer deaths rising significantly between 1920, 1926, and 1931. He directly links this rise to changes in Vienna's water treatment and supply systems during that period.
And connects cancer prevalence to the lack of good spring water.
Right. He observed, or claimed to observe, that cancer was most common where people didn't have access to good, natural spring water. He even goes so far as to say you could map its spread against the length of the pipelines used to transport water.
Pipelines. He had issues with those too.
Big issues. He specifically points out the tar used to coat iron pipes back then, meant to stop rust, was already known in medical science, he claims, to cause cancer itself.
So the pipes themselves are a problem. He contrasts modern pipes with older methods.
He does. He looks back at the Romans using wooden pipes or natural stone conduits and sets them against modern metal channels, particularly iron pipes.
What was his main beef with metal pipes? Iron, specifically.
His argument is that metal pipes cause serious material transformations in the water flowing through them. He talks about electrolytic processes happening on the inner walls.
Like batteries?
Sort of. Triggered by temperature differences between the water and the pipe, the surrounding ground, and interactions with dissolved gases like oxygen and CO2. The CO2, he says, dissolves some of the iron, forming bicarbonates. Then excess oxygen converts this into hydrated iron oxide. Rust.
Which blocks the pipe eventually.
Right. Rust takes up way more space, about 10 times the volume of the original iron. But for Schauberger, the crucial point wasn't just the physical blockage.
What was it then?
It was that this chemical reaction removes what he calls carbonic acid dissolved CO2 from the water, and he saw carbonic acid as absolutely vital.
Vital how?
As essential for the water's vitality, its energy, he uses the word psyche or character.
Its soul, almost.
You could say that. So the water loses its natural high-grade psyche, and, he claims, gets imbued with a pernicious and second-rate psyche by the pipe itself.
So the pipe isn't just a passive conduit. It's actively degrading the water's life force.
That's exactly his view, which is why he argued for using materials that are poor conductors of heat, materials that mimic natural organic structures, like wood.
Wood pipes, wouldn't they rot?
He claimed that properly treated wood, used in the right conditions, could actually last longer than iron pipes and would support the water's natural energy, like the capillary systems in plants or animals.
He also briefly mentions energy generation, doesn't he?
Just touches on it, yeah. Criticizes methods like forcing water through turbines, which he believed physically smashed to pieces the water's inner energetic structure.
Did he offer an alternative?
He makes this remarkable claim, almost in passing, that energy could be obtained much more simply, more harmoniously, directly from deep-sea water using basic equipment, implying our complex, forceful methods are not only damaging, but maybe unnecessary.
Okay, so Schauberger paints this really bleak picture of our senseless toil, messing up rivers, forests, water supplies, pipelines, all by violating natural laws, especially water's laws. What's his alternative? How should we interact with water, with nature, according to him?
It all comes back to that core conviction. Water isn't inert stuff. It's the blood of the earth. Alive, pulsating, breathing, capable of organizing itself, transforming itself.
And he talks about fundamental forces like nature's building blocks.
Yes, he uses these terms carbones and oxygen, not just the elements, but as fundamental opposing energies or principles.
Like yin and yang.
Sort of analogous, yeah. A negative receptive motherly force carbones linked to water, earth, darkness. And a positive active fertilizing force oxygen linked to air, light, heat. Their dynamic interplay, their tension, is what he sees generating life, growth, energy.
And temperature is key to this interaction.
Absolutely crucial. He argues life and energy don't come from uniformity, but from the interplay of opposites. Heat and cold, light and shade. And he keeps coming back to that water anomaly point. Plus 4 degrees Celsius, or 39.2 Fahrenheit.
Where water is densest.
Right, densest and heaviest. But he highlights the paradox. Below this point, under certain natural conditions, water can become lighter, more energized, and actually move upwards, seemingly defying gravity.
And this relates to how natural water moves. He described it as very different from straight flow.
Oh, completely different. He emphasizes that healthy, natural water moves in complex patterns. Spirals, vortices, often a double spiral motion within a larger spiral. He contrasts this sharply with the straight artificial channels we create.
And this natural movement is important.
For him, it's everything. This dynamic spiraling motion is what maintains the water's energy, its quality, its ability to carry nutrients, to self-purify, to organize substances within itself.
He also brings in capillary action, connecting it to life processes.
Yes. Using examples like sap rising in tall trees or blood circulating in our bodies, he argues these aren't just about external pumps, the heart, or evaporation in trees.
Or else then?
He believed it's primarily driven by internal metabolic processes, the vital activity within the tiny capillaries themselves. He even mentions Professor Burgle's work in the text, suggesting capillary action is primary, the heart secondary, and Burgle's experiment.
The hair-thin tubes.
Yeah, showing water rising surprisingly high in bundles of these tubes just by tapping them, suggesting an inherent lifelike activity in the water within these fine structures.
He gives quite a few examples from nature to illustrate these ideas, doesn't he?
He does, like high-altitude springs. How do they get way up there, sometimes on high peaks? He argues it's not just water pressure from below.
Okay.
It's partly negative pressure suction created by complex cooling and material transformations happening deep within the Earth, often involving that plus 4 degrees C transition point.
Okay. What about deep sea water? That's a totally different environment.
Exactly, and a perfect example of his carbonosphere idea. Deep sea water, high in carbonic acid, carbonas, low in dissolved oxygen, total darkness.
And that explains deep sea life.
He argues it does. Why deep-sea fish have delicate skeletons, why some are bioluminescent generating their own light in the dark, and why they basically burst when brought up to the surface with its lower pressure and higher oxygen. He notes this deep water has a highly potent negative charge.
He also talks about water near fish spawning grounds.
Yes, the dark, glistening water often found near springs where fish like trout lay their eggs. He observes how the type of bacterial life changes with light and flow, more activity near the shaded source, less in the brighter, faster water downstream.
And the fish themselves.
He notes the fish near these special spring zones are often tastier, harder to catch, and can even survive in underground caverns if the stream dries up, suggesting they're attuned to the unique quality of that mother water.
And that really strange example of the grotto olm, the cave salamander.
Right. He uses the olm to show how life can thrive in very specific conditions. Deep, dark, but high oxygen water by processing complex carbones. But here's the twist. He points out the olm dies if exposed to more oxygen or light than it's adapted for.
Highlighting a delicate balance.
Exactly. It's not just more oxygen is better. It's about the specific, balanced conditions required for different forms of life.
Like the trout holding steady in a raging mountain stream.
Precisely. We see it and think, wow, what strength. But Schauberger saw it differently. Not just brute force against the current.
But harnessing the water's energy somehow.
Yes, harnessing the water's internal energy, its flow dynamics. Similar to the olm, finding a point of balance or utilizing specific energetic conditions within the torrent to maintain its position with surprising ease.
It sounds like he also saw microorganisms very differently, not just as germs to be killed.
That's a really key insight he offers. He argues the quality of the water dictates the type of microbial life that thrives there. High-grade, energetic, healthy water fosters high-grade bacteria. These perform beneficial functions like breaking down waste or consuming lower-grade organisms. But low-quality, stagnant, degraded water
Fosters the bad guys.
it fosters more primitive, often pathogenic bacteria, the kind that consume the body, whether that body is a fallen log or a living organism. He uses this analogy of hardwood versus softwood floors.
Right, nailworms.
Yeah, mealworms tend to appear in softwood floors, especially if they're sealed off from light and air. His point is the decay organisms appear because the conditions are right for decay. They aren't necessarily the primary cause, but a consequence of the environment.
So the problem isn't the microbe itself, it's the unhealthy environment allowing it to flourish. And that environment is dictated by the water quality.
That's his perspective, yeah. And this naturally leads him to the idea that it is possible to restore water to health, to artificially mimic nature's own restructuring processes.
How did he propose doing that?
By recreating the right conditions. Shielding water from direct light and air, creating specific temperature gradients, using materials that don't harm its vitality like wood, maybe certain metals used in specific ways, and crucially, getting the water moving correctly.
Moving in those spirals.
Yes, and this is where his own invention comes in, the double spiral flow pipe. It was his practical attempt to apply these ideas.
How did it work? Or how was it supposed to work?
It used internal guide vanes, often shaped like spirals, to force the water into that complex, natural double spiral motion he observed in healthy streams.
And what did that motion do?
According to him, it caused a separation effect. Heavier particles and pollutants get drawn towards the central axis of flow. Lighter substances, including bacteria and dissolved gases, get pushed towards the periphery, near the pipe wall.
So it's kind of self-cleaning as it flows.
That was the claim. Bacteria and fine particles move to the edges, away from the main flow. But more than that, this specific motion was meant to induce cooling in the core of the water flow.
Cooling. Why?
Remember the plus 4 degree point. Cooling increases density and energy. This motion concentrates gases differently too. The carbones, carbonic acid, in the colder, denser center, and oxygen near the warmer periphery by the pipe wall.
And he believed this whole process constantly improves the water's quality and energy as it flows.
That's the argument. that this internal dynamic, the interactions between the core and the periphery, continuously increases the water's vitality, its quality. He even claimed, paradoxically, that this kind of pipe could carry more water than a smooth pipe of the same diameter, and that the motion protected the pipe material itself, especially wood, making it last longer, like natural capillaries maintaining their own integrity.
Okay, so we have his sharp criticisms of modern ways
Yeah.
and this radical alternative vision based on water being alive.
Mhm.
Looking at the text, what does Schauberger warn about the future? And what path forward does he actually propose?
The warning in the text is stark. Continuing down the path we were on, ignoring nature's laws, will inevitably lead to bigger and bigger catastrophes.
What-
He lists things like floods, sinking groundwater levels, epidemics, famines. He saw them all as connected symptoms, symptoms of the dying of the whole, the entire system breaking down.
And he wasn't exactly complimentary about the established experts of his time.
Oh, not at all. Extremely critical. He basically argues they're stuck in wrong theories, often just protecting their own jobs and reputations, and actively blocking the necessary changes. He says they rely on inferior education and give advice that's turning Earth into a hell.
There's also a section in the text with some politically charged observations from his viewpoint. We should probably just report those impartially as being his views from 1934.
Right. It's important to be clear this is Schauberger's perspective. He links the societal problems he saw, rising crime, desperation, even the build-up to war in the 30s. He links it directly to the physical and moral decline he believed was caused by these unnatural practices, especially concerning water and food.
He criticizes leaders for listening to bad advice.
Yes. And he states quite bluntly that nature's own laws will bring about a fitting end to what he calls this ineptly contrived culture if humanity doesn't fundamentally change course. He contrasts this with the ancient Chinese culture, which he admired for respecting the carbon sphere, the earth element, and he uses Russia's rapid industrialization leading to famine, in his view, as a warning.
A pretty pointed assessment of his world. So what's his call to action? What should people do?
At its core, it sounds almost simple. Recognize the errors, obey nature's laws. Learn from nature, he calls it the great teacher.
And any specific actions he advocates.
He urges cooperation, working together to rebuild native forests, restore healthy water systems everywhere, and crucially, shifting how we live, living off nature's interest, the ripe, sustainable things it provides, rather than consuming its substance, its capital.
There's a definite sense of urgency in his writing, too.
Absolutely. He felt there was no time to waste waiting for mainstream science to catch up or for vested interests to change their minds. He put a lot of faith in the younger generation.
Believing they could see the truth more clearly.
Yes, and take the lead in making these changes happen.
And through it all, the focus keeps coming back to water.
It really does. His fundamental promise, the bedrock of his hope, is that if we just understand and take care of water, the giver of life, then everything else, the whole system, society included, will start to heal itself almost automatically. For him, understanding water's innermost nature was the absolute key.
It's an incredibly radical viewpoint, isn't it? Especially for 1934. Just challenging so many basic assumptions about progress, about technology, about our place in the world. Schauberger's message is this stark warning. Our path of trying to conquer and control nature, especially water, is destructive.
And the secret to life, health, a sustainable future, lies instead in understanding and cooperating with nature's subtle, often hidden, but incredibly powerful laws.
It really forces you to consider a completely different way of thinking, where technology isn't about forcing our will on nature, but maybe about mimicking and supporting its own inherent vitality.
Yeah, a very different goal.
Indeed. And just to leave you, the listener, with a thought drawn from the text itself. Consider Schauberger's claim that in every drop of water dwells a world of possibilities. Even the divine has its abode in every drop of water. What does it actually mean for our lives, for our health, for our collective future, if through what he called our senseless toil, we are actively destroying this fundamental source of life and possibility? What happens when we rob water of its soul?